Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. When the record stops spinning. When you think about that and you relate it to grief, what comes to mind? I'm Christine Dornetter-Landon, your host of Grief Uprooted. I am a certified in bereavement and grief trauma. And I've been in this career for over 24 years. And when I had the pleasure of meeting this young man who is the author of When the Record Stops Spinning, I was intrigued. And how the book he wrote, between the lines, it was talking about grief. I'm talking about Micah. He's a young man who's joining me today. And when he asked to meet with me and be on Grief Uprooted, I was really, really touched and inspired by his journey. I want to take you back to when you were a teenager, or you may be listening and you are a teenager. And when we're 15, we have such aspirations. We're asked repetitively what we're going to do with our life. What is going to be our career? Where are we planning on going? Well, for Micah, he was going to be a famous soccer player. He put all his energy into soccer. This was his goal. This was going to take him through university. This was going to be his life, his dream. And unfortunately, he was impacted by medical health conditions that took that dream away from him. And Micah takes us on this journey of what comes next. What happens at 15 when that's taken away from you? Where do you go with that? And through his writing, he has become an activist for mental health for youth. He's inspired so many. And he has created music to go along with his books that he has authored. He's quite a remarkable young man. And today's conversation, we not only dive into Micah's trials and with grief and being a youth, we really dive into all sorts of mental health issues that our youth are experiencing or have experienced. So thank you for joining me today. And, do take a moment to like us on social media. Um, Join us by following so that we can reach more people. And if you're a youth listening to this, just know that your story matters. And you too have a story to share that will inspire and change people's lives. And if you're somebody who knows a youth or anyone that could feel some sort of inspiration or healing from this episode, don't hesitate to share it with them. Let's go meet Micah. So before I start today's episode, I want to ask you a question. When you were in high school, did you have a dream? Was there something you aspired to do? I know when we're in high school, and maybe you're a youth listening right now, where they're telling you or asking you, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? What's your plan? And do you have a plan? But what happens when that plan doesn't turn out? What happens when you need to go in a completely different direction? Today, I am welcoming the author of When the Record Stops Spinning. And I'm going to let you tell him a little bit about you. His name is Micah. But this story is one that I can relate to But I also love his book title, When the Record Stops Spinning, because I think that's exactly what happens when you're on a path to a certain dream that you have, and all of a sudden it changes. So, welcome, Micah. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm
Mhm.
super glad we got connected.
Yeah. So, say your full name.
Micah Dawanyi for
Okay.
everyone out there.
Yes, Micah Dawanyi. I got it. And where are you tuning in from?
So I'm in Miami right now.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if you know how much snow we have right now. I would love to be where you are.
I feel so bad when I tell people and they're in a very cold place and they're like, hey, so
Yes.
where are you? And I'm like, oh, well, it's 75 right now. It's
Yes.
it's it's very
You
warm. I kind of feel bad in a way.
you should feel bad.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll
We're
enjoy
under
it for you.
snow. Yeah, we're under snow. Nobody's going outside because it's too cold. We actually have seasonal depression. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's called
Yeah.
SAD.
Yeah.
And my grandparents lived in Florida for years, so I would go there in the summer. And I remember going there in the winter, like with shorts on, and everybody was wearing sweaters. And I'm like, what's wrong with you people? But yeah, we actually have seasonal depression because the seasons change. And right now it's so dark and so cold. So yeah, it's crazy, crazy. So I just want to know before we share, because I know you've authored more than one book. And but what brought you to writing? I love that backstory. So if you could just tell us, what was your dream when you were 15?
Yes, the big dreams. So
Mhm.
writing was very unconventional for me. I grew up playing soccer, and that was my entire world. And I always like to tell people, it's so easy to say in retrospect, like, oh, I was the best thing since sliced bread.
Mm,
That's not what I like to say. I'm not going to say I was the Michael Jordan of soccer, but I just know it was my world. I played for a competitive academy here in Florida. And pretty much all my time away from school was devoted to soccer. I'd often have double practices after a long day of school, and then on the weekend, I'd be traveling to you name it city to go
mm,
and play in a big tournament. And so there was a lot of community there, and it put me on a very consistent routine. And I just fell into that world year after year. So that's pretty much all I was focused on as a kid. I started playing when I was, I think, 6 and then
mm,
stopped when I was 15 because I had a heart complication that proved to be nearly fatal, led to some collapsing episodes and some
wow.
really traumatic moments, and quickly ended my career. They got to a point very quickly where doctors were saying, we can't clear you to play because if you collapse again, it could be the end of your life. You might not get back up. And so I became a liability and couldn't play. And when I was a junior in high school at 15, I just had to call it quits on my entire world.
Mhm.
So that devastation, that's where I know we're going to get into grief,
Mhm.
is I've grieved in many different ways, losing people physically, but that is probably the most distinct grief I felt so far just because I lost my entire world. But it's pretty interesting because that losing such a big foundation just opened me up to trying anything. And so
Mhm.
that's how I got into writing. I joined my school's yearbook program and then I took a creative writing class. And I had an English teacher who asked me to rewrite Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew as a contemporary comedy
Oh
just
my
to stretch my brain.
God.
And I was like, why would you ask me to do that? What does that mean? But it
Yeah.
was so fun once I did it. I wrote the script and we had to act it out. We did a whole play in the program. And I was like, oh, I actually really like this. And I always scored well on essays. So I was pretty good at language arts naturally. So I kind of just fell into that world because I didn't have any time to play soccer anymore. And writing was safe because it didn't conflict with my health regimen at the time because you just
Mhm.
sit down to write. So it just became a safe thing, but a really fun thing to get into.
Oh, there's so many questions I have for you. Just listening to all that, because how did you adjust? See, when we talk about grief, a lot of people will say to me, why, like a person dies, but then my dog dies and I can't get over the dog.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's the impact it has on your life.
Yes.
So when you think about it, at 15, that kid who always went to soccer, um, what happens when that's taken away? So what did you do in all those hours? Like, how did I'm sure your parents or your whoever was taking care of you at the time, or were they like, oh my goodness, we have to find something to do with this boy, or do we have to, like, were you lost? I guess is what I'm trying to ask. And did people recognize that loss?
I I was lost. Yeah. But it was weird. I was so lost that I was almost fine because like I reached such a place of devastation that
Mm-hmm.
I gained all this confidence because I was like, if I lost my entire world, I can pretty much try anything now. And I'm not really scared of failing because I already just got burned with my biggest dream here. So the first thing I did, and in retrospect, I think I actually jumped too quickly and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't allow myself to sit with my emotions. But because I was a soccer player, the first thing I actually did well before the writing was I got a national coaching license and started training and getting into coaching because I was still trying to hold on to that soccer world. And so that was my way because I still got to be around all my friends. I quickly became the assistant coach of my school's varsity program. And then I started a local business.
Yeah.
So I think I was a bit desperate to cling on to that world of athletics. So that's the first thing I did. But I did feel a lot of confidence just to try things. So it was an interesting duality between being lost
Mm-hmm.
and being devastated, but also being like, can't hurt to do X, Y, and Z, you know.
Yeah.
But as far as my community, like my parents, there was no emotional template for what I was dealing with. They never went through anything like that. So I don't even think the word grief was used until I went to therapy in college.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was a learning curve for everybody.
Oh, that's so you're so right with no template. So for myself in high school, I was dyslexic. So when I started in grade nine, I was 15 and I'm 6 feet tall and I wanted to be a basketball player. And the hair alone scared people. So I was set. And then all of a sudden, I had osteomyelitis in my legs, and they thought I had bone cancer. And I'll never forget them saying, "You can't play." And I thought, I'm dyslexic. I'm not functioning well in school. And now all of a sudden, you've taken away basketball. And it was trying to figure out where I fit. And I too went to writing because and it started from a play. I was doing theater class, and of course, I did it on what it would be like to be dead, but seeing the living. So I was a person who died in, at the time, drinking and driving. I'm from the 80s, was very popular. And so they were always putting these cars out in the front of our schools to say, this is what would happen to you if you drank and drive. So I did a whole play in front of the whole school on dying and what was happening as I was watching everybody going, holy smokes, I'm dead. And it was through that I went, oh, I'm connecting to people. And these people have no idea they're grieving and they're talking about it. And these are youth. So then I soon went into being the editor of our school newspaper, um, which was amazing to me because everybody was like, how are you doing this? Because you're dyslexic. And I thought I was able to look past that and look at emotions. I was able to go, wait a second, you're all feeling. And I believe that I retained mine inside, and that's why I was physically starting to collapse. And I thought I've got to do something. Like you have to have an outlet of some kind. So just to jump into that grief part of it, what'd you do with all these types of emotions that you had? And um, when you're losing really your dream or who you were going to be, do you think that differs from the death of a loved one? And how do you think that differs?
Yeah, well, first of all, the similarities in our stories
I
are
know.
I became the head writer of my school's yearbook, and then
Oh
that
yeah.
I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh wow,
Yeah.
that's a small world.
But it was that, sorry to interrupt you, but it was that part where you said, really, there was nothing to lose. I thought the same thing. I thought, what else are you going to do to me? Right? Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So I rolled the dice too.
Yeah, that's how it feels
Yeah.
because it's really ironic how devastation works. It can inspire all this
Mhm.
confidence, change your mentality. But I think what was such an interesting thing for me was the fact that I didn't have a way, like we talked about how there's no emotional template. So
Mhm.
for me, I was just thinking of how can I express myself? How can I start to understand who I can become? And I recognized very quickly that there was a longing for the past, but there was also kind of room for new discovery in a way. So
Mhm.
I think that kind of opened up a lot of curiosity. And then I don't know, I think I felt comfort in not knowing a lot of things. So I
Mhm.
went through the process of just being in the present and allowing myself to fall into a lot of things. Most of my reflections about that time have come in retrospect, but I didn't know what was going on in the moment. So it's, that typical, you see it in films all the time, that journey of self-discovery. I think that was just the important foundation for me at that time.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's exactly it because it's a time to do self-discovery. And so many times, like here on Grief Uprooted, I try to inspire people because everybody that I've had on has had this pivotal moment in their life, either as a child, as a young adult, or as an elderly person, and went, I just changed direction completely. And it was like this devastation happened to me, but it caused me to see the world in a different way. It
Yes.
caused my perspective to change. And with that change comes this whole other world of people. And they're so kind and they're so loving and they can connect and they're empathetic and they are supportive. And it's like, where were these people before?
Yeah.
And it's such a different, and it's hard to explain. Like I think that's why sometimes when you look at friends, you go, I can't explain grief. I just can't to you.
It's,
Um,
yeah.
Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah. No, I think one of the things listening to you talk is, I think when we talk about the physical loss of life, there are
Hmm.
certain tangible things that become inevitable, like a celebration of life, a
Hmm.
funeral, or a ceremony, depending on the culture. But
Yeah.
a lot of those things are not attached to other forms of grief. So I think it becomes very difficult to validate your emotions when you're
Hmm.
dealing with a different form of grief. Even if people don't have the emotional template to understand how to help someone who just lost somebody dear to them,
Hmm.
everyone knows what a funeral is.
Right.
So that type of death is very absolute and very concrete. Unless you're just living in delusion, somebody has died. Our
Hmm.
hearts are going to be heavy regardless of whether you talk about it or not. I think there's an understanding there. But when we talk about these other nuances, grieving a life transition, moving on from a chapter of your life, going back to that phrase, emotional template, there just isn't anything there. And so the thing that's difficult is it can take you a long time to even say, my emotions mattered in that moment. Even if you talked about community, maybe there's nobody seeing you. I wasn't seen in every aspect of my life, and I had to learn to validate my own emotions. There wasn't always a period when I could lean on somebody else to do that. I remember going to therapy as a freshman in college and working through high school, but
Hmm.
there was a period where I had to figure out what do all of these big feelings mean? And I think I only used the word grief maybe in 2021.
Yeah.
So it took years and years to even find that language. So yeah, it's very complicated.
I and the part that kind of resonates with me is everybody looks at grief as sadness. But
Yeah.
I think one of my questions to you is at any point, like all the other emotions you must have felt, but I think one that I felt in particular, I failed. My body failed.
Yes.
And I found that really hard because I did think about what other people were saying.
Yeah.
And when I heard, well, she didn't make the team or whatever, I so badly wanted to turn around and it's not my fault, you know? And because you're young. But what were the other emotions? Did you feel that huge failure at some point? And that and it made you feel like you had some sort of control.
Yeah.
And that's where I find with the death of a loved one, there's no control. It's done. You don't get to go backwards. Whereas this, sometimes you think, well, maybe if I did this different, or I could have, maybe I can go backwards. Maybe if I build up my heart, maybe if I build up my leg, you know, what were the other emotions besides sadness that you felt?
Definitely failure. I felt like I failed, and if I'm being honest, I still have deep regrets about the way it all ended for me, especially because I never found out why I had that heart problem. So I never got closure from a medical standpoint. So there are times when I'm still a massive soccer fan, and me and my dad will watch. We love European soccer because it's more popular there. There's bigger
Yeah.
teams there. So we watch
Football.
our favorite team. Yes, football. Yeah, that's what
Oh.
my dad says. Um, and even when I watch now and I see their mentality, because to be great, you have to have that mentality. And I'm
Hmm.
just like, what would I have been like? I can let my mind drift in that way and then become consumed by failure. And I know even part of my motivation as a writer now, like my dad calls me a very intense writer because when I get into that zone, I'm
Hmm.
very focused. I meet with my editors and we are just dialed all the way in. And part of it is a regret from the way my soccer career ended. I still live with that. And I don't know, I'm coming to I'm coming to peace with it, but I don't know when that's gonna go away, if
Yeah.
it will. But
Yeah.
definitely failure, a bit of guilt, because I think I checked out mentally before the heart problem became absolute. Because there was a period, it happened on the first game of the season.
Mm.
I had to go to the hospital and I found out I had ventricular hypertrophy. That was the
Yeah.
heart complication. And initially, it was you're going to be out for the foreseeable future, but it wasn't a definitive thing yet. But I'd already checked out mentally when that happened because before that, I had spent 2 years with an on and off knee injury, and I always struggled with respiratory
Mhm.
issues. I was a preemie baby and had really bad asthma as a
Mm.
kid, and so I'd already kind of tackled that mountain. So just to dump another load on top of me,
Yeah.
I checked out mentally before the heart problem really consumed everything. And so I know I do feel a sense of guilt about not having that fortified mind.
Mm.
Even though it eventually became beyond my control, I do still feel a bit of guilt about that. So yeah, like you said, there are plenty of other emotions apart from sadness. Definitely.
And I think you don't realize, like, so many people, like, you could have went in so many bad directions. Working with addictions, often working with those people and going backwards, we call it chain analysis, and working my way back to their childhood. And then they'll reveal somebody died, or they felt like they failed at something, or they let someone down. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because to me, hearing it, I'm looking at this amazing person. And then I think, oh, you had your mindset with this. And that that grief or loss that happened then compounds and compounds and compounds. And then they end up as they're in addictions and they have absolutely no idea why.
Yeah.
And that's where it's interesting to see how certain people will take it in one way and other people will take it another. And I think the reason we don't recognize it is because no one brings grief up. No one says, like, when you look at an addict, you never really look at them and go, hey, what happened to you when you were a child? And a lot of the times I know running grief camps, people will stand up and share their grief. You wouldn't believe how many people have like death after death after death after death after death. And then they put on social death, then they put on out being outcasted. And then I just stand there going, whoa, 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 whoa. And then they wonder, why I'm an addict. And I think, well, I wouldn't want to deal with it either. And so you've checked out. You said I'm done, I'm out. and never came back.
Yeah.
And you just need to break it all down. So um, one of the things I was curious about, so you mentioned that in college or university in therapy, you finally heard the word grief in 2021.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty
So
good.
We interrupt this podcast for a dirty moment.
my dirty moment is when I watch films about grief. That is, I think it brings up a lot in me, and I do it to myself on purpose because sometimes I just need to feel it, even if I like to say to my friends, it hurts so good. Because I just need to feel it. So I know I recently watched A Man Called Otto, and it's a film about an elderly man dealing with grief. And the movie just stayed in my heart for a while after I watched it. I think that's when a movie really hits me, is when I'm thinking about it and I have to take a moment to either sit or go for a walk. And it brings up a lot in me. And sometimes it allows me to cry, even because I don't, not that I hold back my tears, but I don't find myself often just releasing that downpour enough. So I know my dirty moment is definitely a good film that deals with grief. Um, And
Mm.
yeah, my dad always jokes, he's like, I have such a melancholic son. But I love a good film about grief. I love, even if it makes me cry or sad, I just need to feel all that because it's part of why I'm alive, you know? So that'd be mine. So well, the first time I started going to therapy was when I was a freshman. I was 17, living on my own for the first time. And
Mm-hmm.
that solitude will bring up a lot of those inner demons in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And even in one of my novels, I talk about how silence is very loud. And the things you're not addressing, once you're by yourself and there's nothing to distract you, that's when it's all going to surface. So for me, going to therapy was really helpful in finding that emotional toolkit to understand what I went through and make sense of it all. And
Mm-hmm.
the way I like to look at it is it's almost like your emotions are different colors. And my therapist was very helpful in explaining the different relationships between the colors and also the isolation of each individual color and what it means. So I didn't go to therapy to become emotionally impassive. I
Mm-hmm.
went to understand what was happening and I was able to gain some knowledge. And there were times when my therapist would send me home with homework and would have me research things and talk to my parents about
Great.
the times we went through. And yeah, it was just very helpful in making sense of that grief because I never had that language. And I don't even think mental health was understood in like the early 2010s in the way things progressed around that COVID era.
Yeah.
I think there was a massive shift in terminology and kind of moving those things into mainstream
Mhm.
society. So it was very helpful for me.
Yeah, that's so good. Like that's with I use a pinwheel all the time. I'm always talking about this pinwheel and all the different colors and how it spins and I think that grief encompasses all those emotions, no matter what they are, whatever you're feeling. But it's this turmoil, and everyone always says, I'm crazy. I don't know how many times I hear that a day. And then I'm always like, you're not crazy, you know? But they're always like, my head is spinning. And I'm like, yeah, that's grief. And I think sometimes we don't realize and I just started this little segment called Unfiltered where I'm only about 5 minutes, but I'm talking about what's happening today in our lives. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm like, you're grieving. And people are like, no, no one died in my life. No, you're grieving. I can tell you're grieving, but I do not know how to get it across to you. But, when we're losing a form or version of ourselves. And I know we're talking about teenagers and how you lost a dream, but this happens when you age. Like when I stopped being able to make babies, when possibly someone gets divorced or your children just move out or all sorts of things can happen to you that you're now grieving that life and now you can move on to this life. And You cannot go backwards. So how do you find, like, it sounds like there was, in general, how would you help youth and young adults try to figure out, okay, I have to kind of be able to let go of that person and reconnect with this person. How does that reconnection for you?
I think the first step is just don't gaslight yourself.
Oh,
When
yeah,
you're,
that's so good.
you know, when you're going through it, don't act like you're fine if you're not fine, because then it's going to take you way longer
So
to
true.
start to heal. And I did a lot of that, and I had people gaslight me.
Mm.
Um, so that's the first step I'll tell any young person, any person, period. Once you want to start working through that turmoil, don't gaslight yourself. Feel what you're feeling. Even if the whole world is telling you that it's invalid, your feelings are valid. So
So I'm gonna
start.
back you up for gaslighting, just in case nobody knows what that means. So give me an example that would gaslight myself.
It wasn't that serious. Saying that to yourself.
Yeah.
Feeling something very heavy in your heart and just being like, oh, it wasn't that serious. I'm being over dramatic. Or if somebody says that to you, that could be a form of gaslighting.
And I think sometimes you say to yourself, well, no one died.
Yeah,
I don't know how many times I've heard that. Well, no one's died.
yeah,
And, then you're like, wow, well, maybe you just did,
yeah,
right? But you don't really see it. And
yeah,
that's a hard one. That's a really hard one. And I think it happens as you age. I think you become this new person as you learn more through life and you
yeah,
gain knowledge and perspective. So you change and you differ as you age.
yeah,
And sometimes you have to be able to go, I have to let go of that and move on.
yeah.
And how do I connect to this person I'm looking at right now? So how did you take all of this? That's what I'm fascinated about. And started writing when the record stopped spinning. Like, what brought the title on? I think I know, but I'm just guessing here. What brought that title on? And the characters. I know there are two main characters. Um, and are it's based on you.
Yeah, yeah. It was a really fun process because as I've gotten into novels, there's kind of two different elements you're bringing together. The really cool plot, the really fun thing, and then the emotional landscape of the story, and you're fusing those to create a really dynamic story. So for me, I was really into music. Music is a big part of my process. And when we talk about emotional processing, music plays a soundtrack to our life, and we can look at different seasons of our lives based on the music we're listening to. And that can provide some comfort and some healing. So I became very interested, focusing on just the plot for now. I was like, what if you could actually revisit the past through music? So that was my first idea for the novel. And so I wanted to have a sci-fi story where they were using sound waves of music to open gateways to the past, literally. And I thought that'd be very fun. But then for me, the heart of the story has to be the emotional journey. So I was looking at the way I grieved a a version of myself that I could no longer access. And so the main character is a college student who was once this brilliant up and coming artist who went through a very tragic accident and lost his ability to create. And so now he's in his senior year of college. And I wanted to have that time in his life because it's a time when everyone's telling you you need to know where you're going. And to just have this person who has no idea what he's doing in life and to have a chance for him to revisit the past. So the other main character, Sahara, is the one who brings the scientific innovation of going back to the past through music to life. And so she presents an opportunity to him to be the test subject for the experiment. And so I was really curious to explore the emotional complexities of what if you could go back and interact with those versions of yourself that you no longer can access? Could you find closure? What emotional nuances would that bring up in you? How could you apply what you see in the past to who you can become in the future? So just fusing all of that together is how I came up with the idea. And I really like it because I call my novels a way of hiding the medicine in the juice because I can make these really cool plots, but then there's those messages about healing and important mental health topics. And I thought it was very important to represent grief in that different light because we're
Mhm.
so used to grief in terms of the literal physical loss. And that was explored in my previous novel, but I was like, I don't think people are talking enough about the other forms of grief. So
Yes.
yeah, there was a lot there, but that's kind of how it fused together.
Yeah. And that's what fascinates me about you because that that really is it. And I've seen you've made soundtracks to go with
Yes,
the books. And with generational grief and working in Indigenous communities and running camps, a lot of ancestry grief is done that way. And it's through meditation and Reiki and taking yourself back to your younger self. And I've actually had this experience of, you know, falling into a deep meditation and going back to visit the child me. And that's really when I hear you describe that, I'm thinking that's what it is. It's a doorway back to, like, I grew up in the 80s. Haha, loved it. And so, you know, all that music takes me back to that child.
exactly.
And I have all these great memories, but I also have a lot of sad memories of my brother dying. But you know, channeling it back and going like, what were the generations before me? What were they doing? And there's all that grief that came before you. And it's there, it's present, but no one really wants to talk about it, acknowledge it. And it's like, how do I encompass that and process that? And I love how you've put it in a book and have people thinking about it, but you really don't realize you're thinking about it.
Exactly. Yeah,
That's so good,
thank you.
right? Because they don't realize that. And, but the message is still getting across and it's still, and I love that because so many times I think I try to say to people, we don't have to talk about death in order to understand grief.
Yes,
And, you know, grief is happening daily to us. We just need to be able to have a conversation about emotions and what we're feeling and making it okay to have these conversations. Um, and there's no right or wrong way to grieve, right? So that's one of the main things. So there's two other books I'm pretty sure that
yes.
you've written. Tell me a little bit about those two.
So my previous novel, so my second book, Battle Scars, it's called Battle Scars and Blossoms, A
Mhm.
Journey Through the Mind. And so I actually look at both novels as polar opposites of each other because Battle Scars and Blossoms deals with a main character who is grieving a loved one who passed in a car accident,
Mhm.
and he has not dealt with it at all. He's just moved on. And so he gets to college, and his mom creates an ultimatum with him because she kind of recognizes he's going down in a very unhealthy way of living his life. And so she says, I'm only going to pay for your tuition if you agree to go to therapy. And so he gets into these comedic scenarios trying to get out of the agreement, but ultimately has to go on that journey to understand why it's important to deal with what you're going through. So I really enjoy that that novel deals with the literal loss of life, and it
Mhm.
deals with a character who has moved on and doesn't want to deal with it. And then when the record stops spinning is grief in a different way and deals with a character who's utterly consumed by his past. So it's kind of two of the many emotional reactions we have to grief
Yeah.
through the main character. So I've really enjoyed that. My first book, which was not a novel, so my last two are novels. My first book was a nonfiction memoir, and it's actually archived now just because it was me talking about my life
Mhm.
and some of the communal grief I've gone through, and it connected to a lot of social injustice issues. But I wrote it from a place of rage. It was called Step Into My Shoes, and I wrote it from a place of rage. And in retrospect, I didn't like how I felt. Every artist has their own way of creating, but I like to be balanced when I write. I like to be in a state of reflection so that I can see from that bird's eye point of view. And my first novel I wrote when I was completely consumed by all of my emotions, and I was still in therapy very early on. And so the process was great. It got me to where I am now.
Hmm.
And I started working on speaking gigs and working with mental health companies through that first book. That was kind of the kickoff.
Yeah.
But I've now focused on the novels because I've learned my artistic process has to be balanced. And I don't like to be falling through different emotions while I'm writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that first book, I still acknowledge it as an important step in the
Hmm.
journey.
Interesting, because I work with a lady from Hospital for Sick Kids. She's the head of palliative care, and she's read all my books and started 24 years ago. And I said, I'm working on another book now. And I said to her, I don't understand why all my books seem to be about me or I've had to experience them. And she goes, because now you're writing a book from the perspective of a professional. You needed to get out your story. So once you got your story out, now you're clear and now you're writing from the professional that you are. And that made me feel so good. Right?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and it makes you realize that that's part of the process,
Yeah.
and it's an okay process. So we're just going to take a small break because I want to come back and ask you a question about youth today and what they're dealing with. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining us here at Grief Uprooted. I just wanted to pop in and say that if you would like to share your grief story with us, if you're looking to inspire others or see how your story can bring healing to others, don't hesitate to visit us at robertspress.com. Again, robertspress.com. We carry over 500 different grief resources. These resources range from books to empathy teddy bears, to the memory heart, all sorts of items that you can use for yourself, for your groups, for your organizations, for hospitals, for funeral homes, so many who are actually walking this journey of grief, or if you are someone that is helping others who are grieving. Just take a moment and visit robertspress.com. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care. And we're back. I love all the books and how open you are about everything. And um, I just love how you share about that first book and where you were at that moment. And I guess I kind of want to talk to you about mental health in youth, um, because it's so big, it's so huge,
Yeah.
and it seems like this mammoth thing that no one can really tackle, but we're trying. Um, and so, if you were talking to another youth, what would you say to them if they kind of had to switch identities or were unable to follow a dream that they were going to follow?
I would say, I would tell a young person, and this is directly from my life. So I don't like the people that, when you get advice from somebody that has never gone through what you've gone through, and they're just like, believe in yourself and it'll be fine. And they never account for all the nuances that arise in our journeys. So I can say this because it affects my life. When you go through a life transition, it's so absolute and it's so bam. So your brain naturally wants to go, what's the quickest thing I can do to restore everything and find and be whole again? But unfortunately, life rarely works like that. Usually you have to begin compounding again.
Yeah.
So I would say the first thing to do is just to set realistic expectations. If you fall into despair because you went through X, Y, and Z, maybe it's a breakup, maybe it's
Mhm.
you used to live for academic validation and now you're not doing well in school, whatever it is, don't try to quickly fix everything all at once because you're going to frustrate yourself when you're seeing slower results. So I would say focus on compounding. You don't have to look at, I know when you're young, you try to think of everything in the context of a permanent life career. It's okay to look at what am I curious to explore in this specific season, even if I don't know where it's ultimately gonna lead to. What is it calling to me right now? Can I find passion in that? You don't have to know all the answers. So I would say start there,
Mhm.
focus on aligning that perspective and setting realistic expectations because that will help nurture your mental health as you go down a new journey because you won't be as harsh on yourself.
Yeah. And I think you always think you're alone,
Yeah.
right? I think you always think you're alone. I know one of your movies you talk about is Soul by Disney.
Yes.
And do you know who Leon Bridges is?
Of course. He's one of my favorites. He's
I
one
love
of
that guy. You remind me of him. Um, I love his music, love it. Bought his record, beautiful gold record. And I just love the feeling I get from that music and how it kind of takes me back. And a lot of when I do youth camps and things like that, music is everywhere because it's the one thing we can connect to and being creative and stuff. What do you think youth are faced with today? Like, what do you think some of the challenges they're faced with, or what were some of the challenges you were faced with that you still think are here that you hope that will leave?
Well, I mean, the big one, social media.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I heard a quote. I don't know how you would feel about this. I heard a quote that said, "We were never supposed to have access to this many people's thoughts on a daily basis." And it kind of made me think,
Mm,
it's like, is this really dangerous? I know when social media began, it was like, oh, community, you can
yeah,
connect with people, you can follow your favorite celebrities. But when I heard that quote, I was like, man, we are accessing a lot of thoughts that
yeah,
we're never going to meet a lot of these people, and we know what they ate for breakfast today. We know who they hate in pop culture. What is that doing to us mentally? So I know social media is a big thing now. And I always say there's no emotional regulation required to post on social media. Whatever you're feeling, you're 3 seconds away from the send button in the comment section. So a lot of that toxicity is because you don't have to look anyone in the eyes and actually see a human. So I know when it comes to bullying or trying to fit in or just trying to be cool, I think so much about being a young person is just trying to be cool.
yeah,
Everyone just want to be cool. And that can seem cringe or corny to say, but everyone wants to be cool. And so now you have all these trends and algorithms telling you what to wear, what to look like, what music is cool, what TV shows are good and worth your time. And I think it can be hard to form your own identity. So I think that is probably one of the biggest things affecting the youth right now. And I've been able to work on some youth initiatives with different programs. I was working on one with an Australian company because of that proposed social media ban for
mm,
kids under the age of 16, I believe, in Australia. And I was working with a company looking at what to do to actually address some of the specifics that kids are going through. But yeah, I'd say social media is a big one, and it kind of reflects a larger umbrella with smaller issues under because it leads to, depression, anxiety,
yeah.
perfectionism, comparison culture, a lot of different things spiral because of social media.
And I think that people get an opinion of you by what you post. I
Yeah, for
think
sure.
that that's where everything is. That's why I chose Grief Uprooted. And then we did a subsection of Unfiltered because I was like, I'm not my social media posts. I'm now 53, riding a motorcycle, driving a fancy car. I'm 6 feet tall. The red hair alone, people have opinions of me. And so it's really funny because you're like, I'm nothing like what you people think. I think I look cool on my motorcycle, but it took me this long to get on. Like I'm living the life I really want to live, and I'm very, very proud of myself and love it. But I too go through grief. I too, on a daily basis, am experiencing this. And, you know, I think it takes once you learn the rhythm, I guess is where I'm going to go with it through soul and jazz music, the rhythm of grief, you integrate it.
Yeah.
So you know when it's coming. You know when you learn the emotions and you learn the feelings, you're able to go, oh, it's coming. And you may not even know why it's there. But it appears. And those are days where I'm like, okay, I gotta be careful here. I might write a book that nobody should be reading. So you just kind of you slow yourself through it. And I think social media is so huge now that you're exactly right. These kids are on here just looking at it going, well, I'm not like this or I'm not like that. And I think it was Einstein that said technology is really going to make us stupid.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, you are so right.
We're
I
seeing it. We are seeing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stupid.
Yeah,
And
people.
it's just
Yeah.
kind of scary,
Yeah.
right? It's just so scary. So, you know, I guess I'm so honored you came on. I know that you're supporting some different charities or organizations. So what were they? Because I'd love to mention them.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, thank you. Thank you for mentioning this. One of the big ones is Unsinkable, and they're actually a Canadian company that also
mhm.
works in the US. So I've been able to partner with them a few times on some different initiatives, but they target the youth mental health crisis through different programs, initiatives, storytelling. Uh, they have many different pathways, but they're very focused on targeting the youth crisis, the mental health crisis amongst the youth. So I
Nice.
know the website is weareunsinkable.com. They're also on social media. We did a grief panel in 20, was it last year or 2023? It should still be available on,
Nice.
on YouTube, partnering with a few colleges, talking about grief with students across different countries. And that's been a great resource for people. They provide toolkits as well. So that's a big company. There's another company based in DC here called Black Mental Wellness that do some very important work, especially in communities where mental health is not talked about at all and where resources are scarce. So they do some great work, and I've been able to work with them as well.
Nice.
So I'd shout those two out. I really love their work.
Perfect. I'll put them in the notes too, so everybody can reach out to those and your books and everything that are on Amazon. Um, you know, the one thing I was going to read to you, I don't know, have you read any of your reviews on Amazon?
Uh, I have, yeah, I've seen some. It's interesting because
I love them all.
I mean they seem great. Yeah, I've read some.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I
yeah.
think my very best one I love because I was reading them. This book takes you on an unexpected journey. You experience laughter, fear, excitement, and all of the emotions through music, which is a universal language. This is a must read. Um, and I loved how, it was an unexpected journey because I think that's what grief is. It's an unexpected journey that yeah, you never knew you were in. But what comes next for Micah?
More more writing, definitely. Gonna work on a fourth book. I
Good.
like to illustrate my covers as well.
Mm.
So I'm drawing right now, and that kind of inspires my writing. I think visual stimuli just triggers something for me. So I'm working on some sketches right now for my fourth book cover, and I want to approach mental health in a different way. One of the things I learned when I did my master's degree is that you can use any creative landscape to deliver a message.
Mm.
And I've done it with two different genres. You know, Battle Scars and Blossoms, the novel was like a family life drama. And then When the Record Stops Spinning is a blend of sci-fi and realism at the same time. And I have plans to kind of dive into some different genres, but I'm always going to be looking for different ways to inject those important themes into the work, sneakily putting it in there, but allowing the readers to just fall into the story, and most of my favorite writers are a lot older than me. So
Mhm.
I'm really focused on just continuing that upwards climb,
Nice.
continuing to see where creativity finds me. Through my master's, I got to write my first commercials, which was very interesting.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'd love to get into, TV or film writing. A lot of novels are adapted. So if that's on the cards one day, I wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
Um, and then more advocacy, working with different programs. I'm always open, to any company emailing me, setting a meeting, wanting to work, especially with the youth. I think because I'm not that far removed from high school and middle school yet. Before Father Time catches me, I still have some years. So I love working with the youth because I think I have a connection with them because they
Yeah.
can someone that's not too far from their age. So yeah, more programs with the youth. And yeah, just
Yeah.
letting my heart go where it goes. I'm open to
I love
whatever
that.
happens in the future.
I love that. You'll always have that connection to youth too, because I mainly work with youth. And a lot of times people will be like, how do you do that? And I always think I stopped growing for a little period of time. And I can go back so quickly to being 15, 16, and remembering it because it was traumatizing. So I remember that stage of my life and I remember the feelings and I remember the emotions. So it's very easy to all of a sudden fall into that world and connect to them. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's one that it's kind of like a gift you're given.
Yeah,
And
I was gonna say that's a blessing because I don't know if everyone can do that.
yeah,
So that's definitely a gift you've been given. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that comes with when you experience this type of stuff as a child. So I can't thank you enough for joining me. And to everybody out there, I'm going to make sure all his books are in the notes, the organizations that Micah talked about. And if you are a youth or somebody, you know somebody who would value from hearing this episode, don't hesitate to share it. Let's start the conversation and talk about grief. It is only together that we grieve, and it's only together that we heal. Thank you, Micah. Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.